In 1291, a group of farmers in the Alps made a pact. 734 years later, that pact created the only nation on earth that has never gone bankrupt. Not once, not ever. Switzerland survived the Black Death, the Napoleonic Wars, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, 2008, COVID, every crisis you can name. Every other nation defaulted at some point. France, 8 times. Spain, 13 times. Germany, twice in 1 century. Switzerland, 0 defaults, 0 currency collapses, 700 years of unbroken financial stability. This isn't luck. This is a system. A formula so ruthlessly effective it makes national bankruptcy mathematically impossible. And here's what nobody tells you. The Swiss formula isn't banking secrecy. It's not neutrality or chocolate exports. Those are symptoms. The real formula is something far more radical. Something every other nation tried to copy and failed. Because it requires giving up the one thing governments love most: unlimited power. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Switzerland will still be standing when every other Western nation drowns in debt. Because the Swiss didn't just build good policies. They built a constitutional system that makes bad policies impossible. Let me show you exactly how it works and why your country will never adopt it. The Swiss system wasn't designed by economists. It was designed by accident, by necessity, by 3 alpine communities that just wanted to be left alone. August 1291. 3 valleys in the Swiss Alps, Uri, Schweiz, and Unterwalden. Representatives from these communities met on a meadow called Rockley. They signed a pact, the Federal Charter of 1291. The charter was simple. Each community stays independent. Each governs itself, but they defend each other against external threats, specifically the Habsburg dynasty trying to conquer them. This wasn't a nation. This was a defensive alliance, a confederation. And here's the radical part embedded in that charter: no central authority. Each community retained complete control over its own affairs. Taxes, laws, defense, everything decided locally. Think about that. Pause. While the rest of Europe built kingdoms with absolute monarchs, these Swiss farmers said, "No king. We govern ourselves." This principle, radical decentralization, became Switzerland's foundation. As more communities joined over 5 centuries, the system scaled. By 1848, Switzerland had 26 cantons, each functioning as an independent state, united only for common defense and foreign policy. But 1848 is where it gets interesting. Switzerland wrote a federal constitution. Most nations use constitutions to grant power to central governments. The Swiss constitution did the opposite. It listed the specific limited powers granted to the federal government. Everything else stayed with the cantons. And they went further. They embedded direct democracy into the constitution. Any law passed by federal parliament could be challenged by referendum if 50,000 citizens signed a petition. Any constitutional change required approval by both a majority of voters and a majority of cantons. The federal government couldn't just pass laws. The people had to approve them. The cantons had veto power. Why does this matter for bankruptcy? Because bankruptcy happens when governments borrow more than they can repay. And governments borrow when they can spend without immediate consequences. When politicians promise benefits today and push costs to future generations. The Swiss system makes this impossible. Every major spending decision requires referendum approval. Every tax increase requires voter consent. Every debt issue can be challenged. The Swiss discovered something every other nation missed. Pause. If you want financial stability, you can't trust politicians to be responsible. You have to build a system where irresponsibility is structurally impossible. 1874, Switzerland expanded referendum rights. 1891, They added the constitutional initiative. 100,000 signatures could force a vote on constitutional amendments. 2003, they introduced the debt brake, a constitutional rule requiring balanced budgets except during recession. Each reform made the system more decentralized, more democratic, more fiscally constrained, and each reform made bankruptcy more impossible. Let me show you exactly how the Swiss system prevents bankruptcy. It's not one mechanism. It's 5 interlocking mechanisms that create a fortress of fiscal responsibility. Think of it like this. Picture a fortress with 5 walls. Each wall protects against a different type of attack. Break through one wall, 4 others still stand. To destroy the fortress, you'd have to breach all 5 simultaneously. That's never happened in 700 years. Here are the 5 walls. Mechanism 1. Fiscal federalism. Switzerland has 26 cantons. Each controls its own budget, sets its own tax rates, manages its own spending. The federal government controls only 32% of total government spending. Cantons control 41%. Municipalities control 27%. Compare this to other nations. US federal government controls 55% of spending. France, 80%. UK, 75%. Why does this matter? When governments control most spending, they can hide costs, borrow, print money, spread the pain across the entire nation. But in Switzerland, if a canton wants to spend money, it has to raise taxes on its own citizens. And those citizens vote with their feet. Canton Zurich raises taxes too high. Businesses move to Canton Zug. Canton Geneva spends too much. Residents relocate to Canton Vaud. This is competitive federalism. Cantons compete for taxpayers by keeping taxes low and spending efficient. The result: Swiss cantonal tax rates range from 11% to 22%. Compare to US state plus federal, 35 to 50% total. The competition keeps rates low because high-tax cantons lose residents and businesses. Other nations: no competitive federalism. Unchecked spending. Debt spiral. Check. Mechanism 2. Direct democracy on spending. Every year, Swiss voters approve or reject dozens of spending proposals through referendums. Here's how it works in practice. 2021. Swiss Parliament proposed 3.5 billion euros increase in military spending. Required referendum approval. Voters rejected it. 51% voted no. The spending didn't happen. 2019. Parliament proposed corporate tax cuts. Required referendum. Voters approved it. 66% yes. Tax cuts happened. 2018. Parliament proposed pension reform costing 2 billion euros annually. Referendum rejected it. 53% no. This happens every 3 months, 4 times per year. Swiss voters receive ballots with 10 to 15 proposals. Federal, cantonal, municipal. Every level must get voter approval for major spending. The result: politicians can't promise benefits without funding. They try, voters reject it. Other nations: politicians vote, spending happens, no public approval. Unlimited promises. Debt explosion. Check. Mechanism 3. The debt brake. In 2003, Switzerland added a constitutional amendment called the Schuldenbremse, the debt brake. The rule is simple. The federal government must balance its budget over the economic cycle. During recessions, deficits allowed up to 6% of GDP. During expansions, surplus is required. Over the full cycle, budget must balance. If government violates this rule, automatic spending cuts are triggered. Not voted on, not debated, automatic. Since 2003, Swiss federal debt has fallen from 48% of GDP to 27%. While other nations doubled or tripled their debt loads, Switzerland cut theirs in half. Other nations: no debt break, unlimited borrowing, debt compounds, crisis inevitable. Check. Mechanism 4. Constitutional tax limits. The Swiss constitution limits federal tax authority. Federal government can only levy income tax, VAT, and a few specific excise taxes. And even those required constitutional amendments to establish. Federal income tax wasn't permanent until 1958. Before that, temporary, required renewal every few years by referendum. VAT wasn't introduced until 1995, required a constitutional vote. Pause. Every attempt to raise federal tax rates requires a constitutional amendment, which requires a referendum, which requires approval by voters and cantons. The result: maximum federal income tax rate is 11.5%. Add cantonal taxes, maximum total about 35%. Compare to France at 55%, Germany at 48%, Sweden at 52%. Other nations: no constitutional tax limits, unlimited extraction, citizens crushed, capital flight. Check. Mechanism 5. Canton and municipal competition. Here's the mechanism that ties it all together. Because cantons control most spending and taxation, they compete for residents and businesses. Canton Zurich has a total tax rate of about 22%. Canton Zurich, 35%. If you're a business or high earner, where do you locate? Zug. The result? Zug attracted Google's European headquarters, Glencore's headquarters, thousands of crypto companies, some of the wealthiest individuals in Europe. Zug's per capita GDP, $180,000, higher than Luxembourg, higher than Monaco. But here's the key: Zug doesn't run deficits. Why? Because if they did, they'd have to raise taxes. And if they raised taxes, residents and businesses would leave for Schweiz or Obwalden or another low-tax canton. The competition creates a race to the bottom on spending, not on services. Cantons must deliver good services efficiently, or they lose taxpayers. Other nations: no competition, monopoly power, high taxes, wasteful spending, no accountability. Check. These 5 mechanisms: fiscal federalism, direct democracy, the debt break, constitutional tax limits, and competition, create a system where government cannot overspend, cannot overborrow, cannot inflate away debt. It's not that Swiss politicians are more responsible. It's that the system makes irresponsibility impossible. Let me show you the proof. Not theory. Numbers. Documents. Comparisons that will terrify you. Evidence 1. Debt levels. Swiss federal debt, 27% of GDP as of 2024. Total government debt including cantonal and municipal, 41% of GDP. Compare to other developed nations. United States, 132% of GDP. Japan, 264%. Italy, 145%. France, 112%. Germany, 66%. United Kingdom, 105%. Switzerland's debt is 1/3 the level of other developed nations. Not because they're poor. Switzerland has the second highest GDP per capita in the world at $92,000, but because they can't borrow without voter approval. Evidence 2. Budget surpluses. From 2003 to 2019, Switzerland ran budget surpluses in 14 out of 17 years. Not deficits, surpluses. During the same period, the US ran deficits every single year. The UK ran deficits 16 out of 17 years. France ran deficits all 17 years. Germany ran surpluses in only 6 years. The debt break works. It's not optional. It's constitutional. And it forces balanced budgets. Evidence 3. Referendum voting patterns. From 2015 to 2023, Swiss voters participated in 87 federal referendums. Of those, 41 involved government spending or taxation. The results? 28 spending increases rejected. That's 68% rejection rate. Only 13 approved, 32%. The pattern is clear. Swiss voters approve spending only when it's clearly beneficial and clearly funded. They reject unfunded promises overwhelmingly. Specific examples. May 2021, Parliament proposed expanding paternity leave, costing €400 million annually. Voters rejected it. 53.7% no. September 2020, Parliament proposed €6 billion for new fighter jets. Voters approved it. 50.1% yes, but only after government demonstrated the funding source. Evidence 4. Crisis response. During COVID-19, most nations exploded their debt. Switzerland increased spending, but modestly. Swiss federal debt increased from 27% to 32% in 2021, a 5 percentage point increase. By 2024, back down to 27%. Compared to other nations, US debt increased from 108% to 132%, plus 24 points. UK increased 85% to 105%, plus 20 points. France increased 97% to 115%, plus 18 points. Why the difference? Pause. Because Swiss COVID spending required emergency referendums. The government held 5 referendums in 2020 through 2021 to approve each relief package. Each targeted, time-limited, voted on by the public. Switzerland spent €40 billion on COVID relief, about 5.5% of GDP. The US spent $5 trillion, 25% of GDP. Switzerland spent 1/5 as much relative to economy size, because every franc required voter approval. Evidence 5. Currency stability. The Swiss franc has been one of the most stable currencies in history. In 1971, when Bretton Woods collapsed and currencies became fiat, the Swiss franc was worth 23 cents. In 2025, the franc is worth $1.16. That's 400% appreciation over 53 years. Meanwhile, US dollar lost 85% of its purchasing power to inflation. British pound lost 90%. Italian lira collapsed, replaced by euro. French franc collapsed, replaced by euro. The Swiss franc strengthened because Switzerland didn't print money to fund deficits. The debt brake and referendum requirements prevented money printing. Now let me make this personal, because this isn't just about Switzerland. This is about your money, your future, your financial security in a collapsing system. Here's what the broken system in other countries means for you. Your savings. That retirement account you've been building for 20 years? In the US, France, UK, currencies losing 85 to 90% of purchasing power since 1971. You saved $100,000 in 1974. Today it buys what $15,000 bought then. Your wealth, stolen by inflation while you slept. In Switzerland, that same $100,000 would have $500,000 in purchasing power today just from currency appreciation. Your taxes. Average Swiss worker pays 28% total tax burden. You in the US? 37%. France? 48%. Denmark? 45%. Think about that. A Swiss worker earning $100,000 pays $28,000 in taxes. A French worker pays $48,000. That's $20,000 per year difference. Over a 40-year career, that's $800,000 in additional wealth retained. $800,000. That's a house. That's your kids' college. That's your retirement. Gone. Extracted. stolen through a broken system. Your future. Your country's debt is exploding. US at $36 trillion. That's $100,000 per person. Your share. Not someone else's share. Yours. Every man, woman, and child in America owes $100,000 before they even start living. Who pays that debt? You do. Through higher taxes, through inflation, through reduced services, through a lower standard of living than your parents had. And it's getting worse. US debt grows $1 trillion every 100 days now. Think about that. Pause. $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest payments alone, $1.2 trillion annually. That's more than defense spending, more than education, veterans, and agriculture combined. Your tax dollars aren't building roads or schools. They're paying interest to bondholders, to banks, to foreign governments. Switzerland doesn't have this problem. Swiss debt per person, $12,000. Falling, not rising. Swiss interest payments, 1.2% of GDP. Your country, 4 to 6% and rising. This is the difference between a system that protects citizens and a system that loots them. And here's what keeps me up at night. It's accelerating. The gap between Switzerland and other nations isn't staying constant. It's widening. Right now, as you watch this, demographics are crushing other nations. More retirees, fewer workers, rising pension and healthcare costs, falling tax revenues. Switzerland has the same demographic problem, but the debt brake prevents unfunded promises. Swiss pension reform in 2022 raised retirement age and reduced benefits. Painful but necessary. Other nations, they promise unsustainable benefits that will require massive borrowing. Benefits they cannot deliver without destroying the currency. High debt nations are entering debt spirals. Their debt is so high that interest payments consume growing shares of revenue. To make interest payments, they borrow more. The borrowing increases debt. Higher debt means higher interest payments. The cycle accelerates. The US spends $1.2 trillion on interest. That's 4.3% of GDP. By 2030, projected to reach $1.8 trillion, or 6% of GDP. Eventually, interest consumes so much that default, inflation, or austerity becomes unavoidable. There is no fourth option. You default, you inflate, or you cut spending so savagely your society collapses. Switzerland is immune. Low debt means low interest payments. Low interest payments mean surpluses. Surpluses reduce debt. The cycle is virtuous, not vicious. If the Swiss system works so well, why doesn't every country adopt it? Simple answer: because the Swiss system requires giving up power. And politicians will never voluntarily give up power, ever. Let me show you exactly who benefits from keeping the broken system that's destroying your wealth: the political class. In most democracies, elected representatives control the budget. They decide spending. They decide borrowing. This gives them enormous power to direct money to favored constituencies, to reward supporters, to punish opponents, to build empires. In Switzerland, politicians don't have that power. Every major decision goes to referendum. Politicians propose, voters dispose. Example 2020. Swiss Parliament wanted 10 billion euros to COVID relief. In most countries, Parliament votes and it's done. Spending happens. Money flows. In Switzerland, required referendum. Voters approved it but amended it. Reduced provisions. Added sunset clauses. Required reporting. Final package. 7 billion euros, not 10 billion. Politicians didn't get what they wanted. Voters decided. This is why politicians in other countries will never adopt the Swiss system. It strips them of power. It forces them to ask permission. It makes them accountable. A US Congress member can earmark $500 million for their district and take credit. Run ads. Get re-elected. A Swiss parliamentarian can propose, but voters decide, and voters often say no. The bureaucracy. Government bureaucracies grow when spending grows. More spending means more programs, more employees, more power, more prestige, bigger empires. In Switzerland, bureaucracy is starved. The debt brake limits federal spending growth to population growth plus inflation, about 2.5% annually. Compare to other nations. From 2000 to 2020, US federal spending grew 120%, UK 85%, France 75%. Swiss federal spending grew 48%, exactly in line with population and inflation. No real expansion. The bureaucracy stayed the same size relative to the economy. This is why bureaucrats oppose the Swiss model. It prevents them from building empires. A German bureaucrat can grow their ministry from 1 billion euros to 10 billion euros over a career. Promotions, prestige, power. A Swiss bureaucrat is stuck at flat funding adjusted for inflation. No empire, no growth, no glory. Special interests. In most democracies, special interests lobby for subsidies, tax breaks, regulations that benefit them. Agriculture lobbies for farm subsidies. Defense contractors lobby for military spending. Green energy companies lobby for renewable subsidies. Tech companies lobby for tax breaks. In Switzerland, these lobbies are weak. Why? Because any subsidy over a certain threshold requires referendum, and voters reject subsidies for narrow interests. Example 2016. Swiss farmers lobby for 2 billion euros in agricultural subsidies. Parliament approved. Farmers celebrated. Voters rejected it in referendum. 62% no. Farmers didn't get their subsidy because voters saw it as wasteful spending that would raise their taxes. In France or the US, the farmers would have won. Parliament would vote. Lobbyists would prevail. Subsidies would flow. Your taxes would rise. Financial institutions. Here's the darkest reason the Swiss model isn't copied. Financial institutions profit from government debt. When governments borrow, banks buy bonds, collect interest, sell them to pension funds, insurance companies, foreign central banks. Government debt is a massive profit center for Wall Street. In 2024, US would issue $2.5 trillion in new debt. Banks will earn billions in underwriting fees, trading commissions, interest spreads. In Switzerland, government issues almost no new debt. Debt break requires balanced budgets. No debt issuance, no bond auctions, no profits for banks. This is why international financial institutions push for fiscal stimulus and counter-cyclical spending. Not because it's good economics, because it creates debt, and debt generates fees. The Swiss model kills this profit stream. Banks hate it. Bondholders hate it. Wall Street hates it. The media. Why don't you hear about the Swiss system in mainstream media? Because media is funded by advertising from large corporations and governments. Both benefit from the current system. Large corporations benefit from government contracts and subsidies. Boeing gets defense contracts. Pfizer gets healthcare contracts. Tech companies get tax breaks. Governments are major media advertisers, public service announcements, recruitment ads, tourism campaigns. Media doesn't want to alienate their funding sources by promoting a system that would cut government spending. The result: Swiss system is ignored, dismissed as only works for small countries, or mischaracterized as banking secrecy instead of fiscal discipline. You've been lied to for decades about why Switzerland succeeds and why your country fails. The system is perfect for entrenched interests in every other country. Politicians get power. Bureaucrats get budgets. Special interests get subsidies. Banks get fees. Media gets advertising. Academics get validation. The only people who lose? Ordinary citizens. You. Your taxes rise. Your savings inflate away. Your future is mortgaged by unsustainable debt. Your children inherit a broken system. And that's why nothing changes. The Swiss discovered the formula 700 years ago, but replicating it requires those in power to give up power. And they never will, voluntarily. Which means you need to understand what happens next. Right now, in January 2025, Switzerland remains the only major economy with declining debt, stable currency, and fiscal surpluses. While the rest of the developed world drowns, Switzerland is pulling further ahead. The divergence is accelerating. Let me show you the timeline of what's coming. 2025 to 2026. Fiscal crisis begins elsewhere. Several European nations will face fiscal crisis. Italy, with 145% debt and 1% growth, cannot sustain its debt load. The math doesn't work. Greece approaches another crisis. Portugal, Spain. Borrowing costs will spike. Investors will demand higher yields to hold risky debt. Governments will face a choice: default or print money. Switzerland, unaffected. Investors will move money from Italian and Greek bonds to Swiss franc assets. Flight to safety. The franc will strengthen further. 2026 to 2027. US fiscal pressure builds. US hits debt ceiling again. Republican Congress. Democrat president, or vice versa. Doesn't matter. Political gridlock creates market volatility. Interest rates spike as investors demand higher yields to hold risky US debt. Treasury options fail. Bond market panic. Switzerland benefits. Swiss bond yields remain low, currently 0.8% for 10-year bonds. The yield spread widens. More capital flows to Switzerland. 2027 to 2028. Currency revaluation discussion. As dollar, euro, pound continue losing value, international discussions about returning to hard money standards. Gold-backed currencies. Asset-backed digital currencies. Bretton Woods 3.0. Switzerland will be the model. The franc's stability will be cited as proof fiscal discipline works. Other nations will promise to adopt Swiss-style debt breaks, G20 summits, international agreements, grand announcements. But they won't deliver, because adopting the Swiss system requires constitutional referendums, power sharing, political decentralization. Politicians will promise, media will celebrate, nothing will change. 2028 to 2030, the franc becomes a reserve currency. Currently, franc is 0.2% of global reserves. By 2030, could reach 2 to 3%. That's 10 to 15 times increase. Why? Because as dollar's share of reserves falls, currently 58%, down from 71% in 1999, central banks need alternatives. They're buying yuan, but don't fully trust China. They'll buy France because Switzerland has a 700-year track record. This will make Switzerland even more financially powerful relative to its size. Early warning signs to watch. Here's how you'll know the crisis is accelerating. If franc rises above $1.30 per dollar, currently $1.16, it signals serious dollar weakness. Monitor monthly. If Swiss 10-year bonds go negative, currently plus 0.8%, it means investors are so desperate for safety they'll accept negative returns. Crisis is near. If foreign franc holdings exceed 500 billion euros, currently 320 billion, major capital flight from other currencies. Right now, all indicators show the Swiss system strengthening while others weaken. The gap is widening, and it will continue widening because the Swiss system has structural advantages that cannot be overcome by temporary policy fixes elsewhere. So that's the formula. 700 years of financial stability, not through luck, not through banking secrecy, not through geography, through a constitutional system that makes government bankruptcy impossible. 5 mechanisms working together. Fiscal federalism, where cantons control spending. Direct democracy, where voters approve every major decision. Debt break requiring balanced budgets. Constitutional tax limits preventing unlimited extraction. Competition between cantons creating a race to efficiency. This isn't just about Switzerland. This is about what's possible when you design a system that constrains government power instead of concentrating it. Every other wealthy nation is drowning in debt. US at 132%, Japan at 264%, Italy at 145%, France at 112%, all racing toward bankruptcy, default, or currency destruction. Switzerland sits at 27% debt to GDP, falling, with the currency appreciating while others collapse. This isn't because Swiss politicians are better people. They're not. It's because the Swiss system makes fiscal irresponsibility impossible. You cannot overspend when voters must approve every decision. You cannot overborrow when constitution requires balanced budgets. You cannot overtax when citizens can move to the next canton. The tragedy is that every other nation could adopt this system. US has 50 states. Give them Swiss-level autonomy and direct democracy. You'd replicate the formula. Germany has 16 states. France, UK, Italy. Every democracy could do this. But they won't. Because the Swiss system requires those in power to give up power, and power is never surrendered voluntarily. So Switzerland will remain the exception, the only nation that cannot go bankrupt because its constitution won't allow it. While every other developed nation approaches fiscal crisis, Switzerland will remain stable, wealthy, secure. The formula has worked for 700 years. It will work for 700 more. Not because of Swiss exceptionalism, because of Swiss constitutional design. You've now seen the formula that makes national bankruptcy impossible. 5 mechanisms, 700 years of proof, and a system that politicians in every other country will never adopt because it would strip them of the power they crave. The Swiss won't go bankrupt. Pause. But here's what most people don't understand. The real question isn't whether Switzerland survives. The question is what happens to your money when your country doesn't, when your currency collapses, when your savings evaporate, when your retirement disappears. And that's what we're covering next. If this opened your eyes to a system you didn't know existed, subscribe, because as other nations collapse into debt crisis over the next decade, Switzerland will remain standing. And I'll show you exactly why, step by step, as it happens. The Swiss discovered the formula in 1291. 734 years later, they're still the only ones using it. And that's why they're the only ones who never go bankrupt.